In the shadow of the towering pines, where the wind whispers secrets no one dares repeat, the house sat like a silent predator, hunched against the grey sky. Locals avoided the winding path that led there, their curiosity mingled with fear, and rumors twisted through the nearby town like smoke, children vanishing without trace, strange lights flickering in the windows at night, and an unshakable sense that the family inside was not quite human. He was born into this isolation, a boy whose eyes carried the uncanny clarity of generations turned inward, whose body betrayed the heavy toll of blood too closely kept. From the moment he could walk, his mother's presence was more than guidance, it was an obsession, a tether that refused to loosen. People whispered, hearts pounding, that the boy's laughter echoed too sharply in the forest, carrying the weight of a lineage that should have ended long before. And then came the day he declared what no mind could digest: he would marry his own mother. The words struck the town like a thunderclap, but when anyone tried to intervene, the forest swallowed their courage, and the house remained unyielding. Inside, the air was thick with old secrets and the must of generations hidden away, a twisted legacy that had silently brewed for decades. No outsider could understand, and perhaps none survived long enough to tell. In that house, in those woods, the most inbred man alive walked a line between madness and inheritance, carrying the grotesque weight of a family the world had almost forgotten, a family the world might be better off forgetting forever. Key point number 1 revolves around the isolation of the family, and understanding the depth of that isolation requires imagining a landscape untouched by modern life, where civilization's reach is weak and intermittent. Nestled deep in a forest that spreads like a dark, impenetrable ocean, the family's home is barely visible from the main road, hidden behind a wall of ancient trees whose trunks are thick with moss and whose branches weave a shadowed canopy that blocks sunlight. The journey to reach this place is treacherous. Narrow, uneven dirt paths twist through the woods, lined with undergrowth so dense it scratches at anyone attempting to pass. Even the locals, who are accustomed to rural hardships, speak of the path in hushed tones, warning that once you enter, you are not easily seen again until the woods choose to release you. In this environment, the family's isolation is not just physical but psychological, shaped by generations who have learned to exist without the gaze or interference of the outside world. The isolation begins at birth, with children growing up entirely within the boundaries of their own bloodline, their interactions limited to the adults in the home and the few siblings present, cultivating an insular mindset and a warped understanding of normal social behavior. The family does not just avoid townsfolk, they actively conceal themselves. Windows are often shuttered, and doors remain closed even in warm weather, cutting off the faint possibility of being observed. Supplies are obtained sparingly, often through brief trips to the nearest small town at dawn or dusk, when few eyes are on the roads, and the family's presence is easy to overlook. Rumors about them grow precisely because of this invisibility. The less people see, the more they imagine, and the more vivid the stories become. Over the years, the surrounding community learns not only to respect their privacy but to fear it. Strange noises echo through the forest at night, animal-like calls, or the clattering of old tools, yet no one dares to investigate. The isolation is a kind of cocoon, preserving traditions and behaviors that would never survive in a world exposed to law, education, or even casual observation. It is in this silence and seclusion that the family's dynamics develop without intervention, allowing patterns of behavior to fester unchecked. Their existence becomes a closed loop, where rules are dictated entirely by precedent, superstition, and necessity, and the outside world is more myth than reality, a place they hear about only in whispers carried by passing travelers or distant relatives. This intense and deliberate seclusion lays the groundwork for all subsequent events, providing both the literal and figurative darkness in which the most unimaginable acts can take root. Key point number 2 centers on the birth of the boy, a child whose very existence carries the weight of generations confined to the same bloodline. His arrival is marked not by celebration but by quiet tension, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension from the family members who understand, at some level, the consequences of their tightly interwoven lineage. From the moment he opens his eyes, there is a sense that he is both ordinary and unsettlingly different. His features are familiar yet distorted, a patchwork of traits repeated and exaggerated across previous generations, a living embodiment of the family's hidden genetic legacy. His skin is pale in the dimly lit home, his eyes unusually large and alert, taking in the world with a sharpness that is almost predatory. Even in infancy, his movements are oddly deliberate, as if he is aware of the boundaries and rhythms of the house in ways that surpass normal perception. As he grows, subtle differences emerge. His body develops slowly, unevenly, and certain physical characteristics, twisted fingers, a hunched posture, and an unusual gait draw quiet attention from the adults, though never voiced outside the family. The adults, themselves products of decades of inbreeding, recognize these traits not with alarm but with a resigned familiarity, as if reading a map they have memorized over generations. The boy's mind is equally affected. Early on, he demonstrates behaviors that are startlingly focused and obsessive, often repeating tasks or fixating on objects with intensity that can verge on dangerous. Yet there are moments of startling lucidity and cunning, an intelligence sharpened in isolation, and tempered by social norms or external influence. His language develops unevenly, sometimes precocious, other times stilted, reflecting the fractured social environment in which he is raised. The family, bound by secrecy and fear of outsiders, begins to treat him not simply as a child but as the next vessel in a long chain of inherited traits, both physical and psychological. From birth, he is groomed to internalize the family's insular worldview, learning that the outside world is irrelevant or hostile and that loyalty to the family supersedes all else. Even at play, his interactions with siblings or cousins are tinged with an intensity and strangeness that hint at patterns of behavior they do not fully understand but are conditioned to accept. This child, born of the family's tightly guarded bloodline, is simultaneously a product of his environment and a reflection of the consequences of generations of unchecked inbreeding. His early life sets the tone for the complex and disturbing relationships that will define him, shaping his identity in ways that are inextricable from the family's isolation, their secretive traditions, and the silent, unrelenting pressure of their hidden legacy. Key point number 3 revolves around the growing suspicions and rumors that begin to circulate among the nearby townspeople, a subtle but insistent pressure that slowly encroaches upon the family's secluded existence. In a rural region where everyone knows everyone, the family's total withdrawal from society does not go unnoticed, though the nature of their secrecy fuels imagination far more than observation. At first, it is small things that provoke curiosity, a child glimpsed briefly in a window, faces appearing at odd hours near the edge of the forest, the low, persistent hum of voices or the occasional shriek that cuts through the otherwise silent nights. Neighbors speak of these occurrences quietly, their tones tinged with nervous laughter that barely conceals fear. Over time, the stories become more elaborate, as fear has a way of distorting truth into legend. People whisper that the family engages in strange rituals, that children vanish for days only to reappear unchanged but somehow different, and that there is a palpable tension in the air whenever one approaches the property. Those who venture too close report feeling an oppressive weight, a sensation of being watched even when no one is visible, and the woods themselves seem to hold their breath in the presence of the house. The family, aware of these growing suspicions, responds in ways that heighten unease. Windows remain shuttered even in warm months, doors are bolted, and any interaction with outsiders is minimal and fraught with tension. The few who attempt conversation recall an almost predatory sharpness in the family members' gazes, an awareness of boundaries that extends beyond the physical into a psychological terrain that unsettles the bravest visitors. Local children, who might otherwise play near the forest's edge, are warned by parents to stay away, and older residents tell stories of previous generations who disappeared into the woods, never to return. These tales mix fact and superstition, feeding a collective imagination that paints the family as more than human, as if some ancient, unnatural presence lingers among the trees. Gossip travels slowly in this part of the world, but it travels deep, embedding itself in the minds of the townspeople, who begin to associate every unusual event, a missing pet, a sudden illness, a strange scream in the night, with the family. The more outsiders speculate, the more insular the family becomes, reinforcing the cycle of secrecy and suspicion. What begins as idle curiosity gradually evolves into a tangible tension, a sense of foreboding that blankets the area. The woods, once merely a backdrop for rural life, become a stage for something darker, a theater of whispered horrors that no one dares to confront directly, but everyone fears deeply, a fear that grows with every passing generation. Key point number 4 focuses on the unnerving bond that develops between the son and his mother, a connection that surpasses conventional boundaries and begins to define the family's twisted dynamic. From an early age, the boy shows an unusual dependence on his mother, one that is far beyond the ordinary attachment expected of a child. She is his constant presence, his guide, and the center of his understanding of the world, a figure who dictates not only his daily routines but the very framework of his beliefs and emotions. The isolation of the home magnifies this connection, as there are few other influences to moderate or challenge it. Their interactions, though outwardly maternal, carry an intensity that unsettles anyone who might observe them, a mixture of admiration, fear, and an unspoken code of loyalty that seems to exist outside normal moral or social structures. The mother, herself a product of generations of inbreeding and isolation, responds in ways that reinforce this dependence. She cultivates his intellect and abilities, teaching him survival skills, reading, and obscure knowledge, while simultaneously instilling in him a belief that the outside world is dangerous, shallow, and inferior. In this environment, emotional boundaries blur. Affection, discipline, and obsession intertwine, creating a psychological ecosystem in which the boy's sense of identity becomes inseparable from his mother's presence. As he matures, this bond evolves into something more complex and disturbing. His admiration shifts toward an inappropriate fixation, a belief that the ultimate loyalty and understanding can only be shared with her. She, in turn, subtly encourages this attachment, rationalizing it as protection, love, or continuation of the family line. Every gesture, every word exchanged between them carries a weight that outsiders would struggle to comprehend, a rhythm of interaction honed over years of isolation that reinforces their mutual dependence. Their closeness becomes both a shield and a trap, insulating them from the outside world while simultaneously cementing a reality where moral and social conventions have little meaning. This bond affects the wider family dynamics as well, influencing siblings and cousins who grow up witnessing a relationship that is intensely private yet powerfully visible, creating confusion, fear, and mimicry in younger children. The psychological tension generated by this relationship lays the groundwork for the son's eventual decisions that will shock the outside world but feel inevitable within the context of the family's insular universe. The interplay of isolation, inherited mental patterns, and obsessive emotional attachment produces a scenario in which love, control, and domination intermingle, shaping a young man whose understanding of loyalty, family, and desire is inextricably linked to the figure of his mother. It is within this tangled, almost predatory intimacy that the seeds of future transgressions are quietly, irrevocably sown. Key point number 5 centers on the shocking decision the son makes to marry his own mother, a choice that shocks the few who even know of the family's existence and defies every social, moral, and legal boundary. The path to this decision is not sudden but develops gradually, shaped by years of isolation, obsessive attachment, and the normalization of behaviors that would horrify the outside world. From childhood, his mother has been the central axis of his emotional and intellectual life, guiding him, protecting him, and instilling in him a belief system where the outside world is alien and hostile. In such a closed environment, the distinction between love, loyalty, and desire. Key point number 6 focuses on the attempts by authorities and outsiders to intervene, and the unnerving resistance the family exhibits in response, which only amplifies the mystery surrounding them. Once the shocking truth of the son's marriage to his mother begins to reach the ears of neighbors and local officials, there is a mixture of disbelief and horror, prompting some to take action. Key point number 7 focuses on the hidden secrets of the woods surrounding the family's home, a labyrinthine and ominous environment that has sheltered generations of unnatural behaviors and clandestine rituals. The forest itself is more than a backdrop, it is a character in the story, alive with an almost sentient presence, thick with towering pines and oaks whose roots twist like veins through the soil, creating a tangled floor that slows progress and conceals whatever lies beneath. The paths through the woods are irregular and poorly marked, worn only by the family and the occasional wildlife, leading outsiders into confusion and disorientation. As investigators or curious locals venture closer, they report strange symbols carved into tree trunks, small clearings where the undergrowth has been unnaturally flattened, and remnants of structures hidden under the forest canopy, long abandoned but deliberately preserved. These structures, often simple cabins or lean-tos, appear at first to be ordinary, but closer inspection reveals ritualistic arrangements, stones placed in circles, remnants of fires positioned with care, and objects whose purpose is deliberately cryptic, suggesting practices both ancient and deliberately concealed. In addition to physical artifacts, the woods carry intangible signs of the family's presence. The air feels heavier, denser, as though each step forward carries the weight of unspoken history. Sounds are distorted, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, and distant, unplaceable noises echo through the trees, amplifying a sense of unease. Seasonal changes alter the forest dramatically, with fog clinging to low-lying hollows in autumn and winter, masking movement and sound, while the thick canopy in summer traps heat and shadows, creating a nearly permanent gloom. The family has used these features deliberately, moving silently through the forest, storing supplies, and conducting activities far from prying eyes. There are whispers among outsiders that even the wildlife behaves differently near the forest's heart. Birds avoid certain areas, and domestic animals brought near the property grow restless or refuse to enter. The woods also serve as a natural defense, a buffer that discourages investigation and conceals evidence of the family's practices from the outside world. Over decades, the forest has become a repository of secrets, each tree and stone holding a memory of deeds that outsiders would struggle to comprehend, a map of hidden lives and transgressions. Within this living labyrinth, the family has cultivated an environment where abnormal traditions can thrive unchecked, each generation inheriting not only bloodlines but also the rhythms and spatial logic of the woods. The network of hidden clearings, cabins, and symbolic arrangements reinforces their isolation and autonomy, shaping their worldview and behaviors in ways that are inseparable from the forest itself, creating a living ecosystem that is both protective and oppressive, a dark sanctuary that nourishes secrecy, obsession, and the continuation of a lineage that the world at large might never fully understand. Key point number 8 revolves around the tragic repercussions of the mother-son union and the way it begins to manifest physically, mentally, and socially within the family, creating a cycle of degeneration that compounds with each generation. The children born from this forbidden marriage are not merely additions to the family, they are living consequences of the centuries-long isolation and inbreeding that defines the lineage. From birth, these offspring display signs of severe genetic concentration, with physical deformities that range from subtle asymmetries in facial features to more pronounced malformations in limbs, stature, and posture. Their growth is uneven, their development unpredictable, and even in infancy, there are markers of neurological irregularities that suggest a fragile connection between body and mind. The family, steeped in secrecy and accustomed to such anomalies, treats these children with a combination of reverence, resignation, and utilitarian purpose, as if each new life is both a miracle and a burden. Beyond the physical manifestations, the children inherit behaviors and mental patterns amplified by generations of insularity. Some display heightened intelligence in specific, narrow domains, coupled with obsessive tendencies or repetitive rituals, while others exhibit impulsivity, aggression, or severe anxiety, reflecting a mind shaped in isolation and conditioned by distorted family dynamics. Education is informal and limited, knowledge is passed down orally or through observation, focused on survival skills, obscure family traditions, and the maintenance of secrecy rather than engagement with the outside world. Socially, the children are almost invisible outside the forest. They have little contact with peers, rarely venture beyond the woods, and develop communication skills and social understanding primarily within the confines of a family structure that normalizes extreme dependency and unquestioned loyalty. As a result, each generation becomes increasingly detached from societal norms, more physically and psychologically distinct, and more entrenched in the family's secluded worldview. The forest continues to serve as a barrier, a protective shell that shields the family from external judgment while simultaneously enabling the perpetuation of destructive patterns. Over time, the effects of repeated inbreeding, isolation, and psychological reinforcement compound, creating a lineage that is progressively fragile yet fiercely self-contained. The offspring, despite their vulnerabilities, carry the family's legacy forward, embodying both the genetic and cultural consequences of a system that values preservation of blood over health or morality. These tragic repercussions ripple outward in subtle ways through community whispers, occasional confrontations with outsiders, and the lingering sense of unease that anyone who ventures near the forest cannot escape. The cycle of degeneration, reinforced by secrecy, obsessive attachment, and the deliberate avoidance of outside influence, ensures that the family's hidden horrors persist and intensify with each successive birth, leaving a shadowed imprint that cannot easily be undone or understood by the world beyond the trees. Key point number 9 revolves around the whispers and fragmented attention the family receives from the outside world, as sporadic leaks of their story make it into local consciousness and media, yet are systematically buried or dismissed, leaving the true horrors obscured. Despite the family's extreme seclusion, rumors inevitably escape the forest's shadow, carried by wandering travelers, frightened neighbors, or distant relatives who glimpse something unsettling during brief, chance encounters. Each report is partial and incomplete, a glimpse of a strange figure at a window, an unnatural scream in the night, or the sudden appearance of a child who seems physically or mentally different from any known human norm. These fragments coalesce into a narrative that outsiders struggle to comprehend. Law enforcement receives tip-offs but rarely has sufficient evidence to act, and local authorities, constrained by bureaucracy and the limited reach of their influence, often opt to dismiss these stories as rural folklore or exaggeration. News of the family occasionally seeps into print or oral reports, but the information is sensationalized, misreported, or quickly overshadowed by more conventional stories, ensuring that the true nature of the events is never fully documented. Each leak that occurs is a double-edged sword. It spreads knowledge of the family's aberrant practices, yet simultaneously diminishes the credibility of those who report it, creating a pattern of disbelief that further protects the family. Outsiders who attempt investigation find themselves facing the same barriers that generations before them confronted: dense woods, hostile terrain, and a household that exerts an almost preternatural control over what is seen and what remains hidden. Meanwhile, the family continues its lives largely uninterrupted, aware of the fragile attention paid by the outside world and exploiting it to maintain their secrecy. The sporadic media coverage, rumors, and failed interventions contribute to the mythos surrounding the family, turning them into figures of both terror and curiosity. People speak in hushed tones, often framing the family as legendary or cursed, reinforcing the notion that the woods themselves are imbued with a protective, almost supernatural presence. Within this context, the true story, the psychological complexities, the genetic consequences, and the moral transgressions remains buried, known fully only to the family and obscured by layers of rumor, fear, and societal denial. The outside world glimpses pieces of the puzzle but is never permitted a complete view, leaving the family's legacy shrouded in ambiguity. The tension between revelation and concealment shapes the narrative, ensuring that even those who hear of the events cannot fully grasp the magnitude of what has occurred. The whispers, rumors, and occasional documentation act as both warnings and invitations, drawing curiosity while simultaneously discouraging inquiry, perpetuating a state of suspense and horror that lingers beyond the forest and embeds itself in the collective consciousness, leaving the family's true story as a mystery the world cannot easily unravel. Key point number 10 focuses on the lasting legacy of the family's horrors and the enduring shadow cast by their isolation and inbreeding, a chilling imprint that persists across generations and continues to haunt the landscape long after any outsiders have glimpsed their existence. The forest, once simply a physical barrier, becomes a repository of memory and consequence, where the acts of one generation echo into the next. Children born into the family inherit not only the genetic consequences of repeated inbreeding but also the psychological and social patterns that have been cultivated over decades, resulting in a lineage that is increasingly fragile, insular, and divorced from conventional reality. The effects are both visible and subtle: malformed features, developmental delays, obsessive or erratic behaviors, and an almost predatory intelligence adapted to the rhythms of the isolated household. Each birth reinforces the family's internal logic and justifies the continuation of practices that would horrify the outside world. Beyond the immediate physical and psychological consequences, the family's legacy extends into the perceptions and fears of those who live near the woods. Locals speak of the forest in ominous terms, and even those who have never ventured close sense that something unnatural persists within its depths. The woods become a symbol, a cautionary presence in the landscape, where curiosity is tempered by dread and imagination amplifies reality into legend. Generations of secrecy, obsession, and isolation ensure that even when details leak, the true magnitude of the family's aberrations remains obscured. The cycle of horror is self-perpetuating, as each generation inherits not only blood but also a worldview shaped by extreme dependence, distorted morality, and the normalization of abnormal behaviors. Outsiders who attempt to intervene are met with the same resistance that has protected the family for decades, reinforcing the sense that their world is impermeable, a closed ecosystem in which the consequences of exposure are unpredictable but potentially devastating. The family's story, partially glimpsed through rumors and sporadic reports, leaves a haunting impression. A lineage that should have been extinguished continues, a hidden presence that defies conventional understanding and eludes societal control. Even as time passes, the imprint of the family persists. Children who are born continue patterns of degeneration, the forest conceals its secrets, and the cultural memory of their existence lingers in whispers, in fearful glances toward the trees, and in the uneasy fascination of those who hear the story secondhand. This legacy is not static but dynamic, evolving as each new generation is born, carrying the compounded effects of isolation, obsession, and inbreeding, and perpetuating a cycle that is as inescapable as the forest itself. In this way, the family's history is less a series of discrete events than a continuous, self-sustaining nightmare, a hidden truth that lingers in the American woods, both a warning and a testament to the consequences of human behavior left unchecked, a shadow that refuses to dissipate and ensures that the horrors, though largely unseen, are never truly gone.